We are the Church of the Larger Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation with no geographical boundary, working toward creating a global spiritual community, rooted in profound love, which cultivates wonder, imagination, and the courage to act. Adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for many bricks and mortar congregations. Early on in the pandemic, we were in a unique position to assist many congregations with the transition. We hosted special episodes of The VUU, provided advice and counseling to religious professionals, and trained congregations for live streaming worship, all while providing robust online programming for our members. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine to our letter writing ministry, we have found ways to build connection and community even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison, and investing in innovative ministry. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and to fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The VUU. The VUU is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message.
Hola, mi gente. Hello, everyone. We are so glad that you are here with us again on The VUU. I am Christina Rivera, she, her pronouns, and I'm delighted, really, really stoked that we are in this episode, as I get over the frog in my throat, in this episode, inviting leaders from Black Lives Matter, Phoenix, and Phoenix Metro. And we're going to get into those introductions. But first, our co-hosts introductions. I am coming to you live from Central Virginia, where it is just a mess outside. We had a huge storm yesterday that was just really powerful. And which means I live on some of you know, I live on a rural farm, which means my driveway is now like huge guts and gullies. So that's not looking real good, but it's just looking like it's about to storm again right now. So we'll see how we get through this this live time with you all. Aisha, how you doing?
I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington. I'm doing well. It's still a pandemic, and sometimes when I forget words and sentences and how to, do things, I remind myself that this is still a pandemic. And so other than that, I'm doing really well. Dawn, how are you?
I'm in New Jersey. I think I've got Christina's used weather. It's kind of blowing around out there. Everything on the East Coast, we always get everybody else's used weather. And I am in South Jersey in a teeny little town called Egg Harbor City, which is where I live. And things are pretty good. It's some of you know I work part-time, so this is one of my weeks when I am off. It's almost full-time, but still, I get these weeks where I call them furlough weeks. So I am off this week, and my project for my furlough week is to create large clear plastic barriers for us to use in worship so that our musician does not have to wear a mask while trying to sing, and I don't have to wear a mask while trying to preach. So that's my project for this week, and it's so far I still have all my fingers, so we'll call it good.
That is good.
Yes, and I'm going to hand it back to Christina before I babble on too much.
And as always, we're so grateful for Tanner Linden behind the chalice doing our tech. Please be sure to interact with Tanner on the comments. He gets those comments to us so we know what you're saying, and we can reply, or if you have questions, feel free to drop those in or just say hi, because we know that you're out there and we love you, and we're really excited when our viewers come back again and again. So in this episode, we are welcoming Zarra, who's the co-minister of Activism and co-director of Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro. Keisha, who is the co-minister of Activism and security liaison of Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro. Mimi is the co-minister of art of Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro. And welcome return for Janine Gelsinger, who's the executive director of the VUU Justice Arizona Network. And today our guests we're going to be discussing like building partnerships, community organizing, and how does Blackness show up in those spaces. And for me, one of the most important things about that conversation is accountability. So if we are working in primarily heavily predominated white congregations, how are we showing up to be an accountable relationship, so that we are not trying to be in spaces in ways that are harmful, when we're actually trying to work to get everybody free. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Hey. So Janine actually gave me this first question, is just to tell me a little bit about how you all met, because so often, we have well-meaning congregations who want to run off and join the very first Black Lives Matter organization that they can find, and be all the things. And sometimes that way of being in accountable relationship just really isn't really accountable. So I'm wondering if you all can share a little bit about how y'all met.
Well, Janine,
I'm going to ask you to go. Go ahead, sorry.
Janine, did you want to start?
Yeah, so I think we all met in different ways. I know Mimi and I met a few years ago now on the Phoenix Defund Coalition, where a bunch of the organizations in Phoenix decided to work together to go after that police budget in the city of Phoenix. So that's the first time Mimi and I met, for sure. Zarra, do you remember how we met?
I think it was Oak Flat. I think it was at Oak Flat. At like a campfire with counselor. Oh, yeah.
And Keisha, how did you all come to be working with each other?
Yeah, we actually met. I think we'd had a few conversations prior to just on the phone or via Zoom, but we met in person on the front lines in Minnesota the Line 3 fight currently happening.
Yeah. I think one of the things that strikes me about that meeting in person, even if you've had some online connections, is that ability to, you know, be in the same space with each other. And so often, you know, sometimes our communications can start electronic, and, you know, sure, that may make the first connection. But it's those in-person connections that really kind of solidify that. And I think sometimes in our congregations, at least, I think folks can get a little reticent, and maybe like Janine was mentioning, you know, we'll send a letter from our board wanting to be in touch with your board about how to do all of the things. And I think we forget about breaking bread with each other and sitting with each other and eating with each other and laughing with each other first. So
some of the things that, I mean, one of the things I know from what Janine has shared is organizing is the art of showing up. Can you say more about what that looks like, especially when we're talking about folks who are white, of European descent, who, you know, want to feel that they want to help, but sometimes I have experienced some folks as taking over. They don't want to just make sandwiches or whatever it is. So when folks talk about organizing being the art of showing up, can you say a little more about what that looks like, and in a best case scenario, how you feel supported?
Yeah, I can touch on that. So I think that really, yeah, the most important part of organizing initially is really just showing up. And so if you want to get involved, you know, showing your face, especially as a white person trying to build relationships with Black and brown communities, there's a lot of trauma there. And so it's just not gonna, you know, we're not gonna be like, oh, look at you, you showed up, you can join us now, you get a cookie. You know, it's for the first couple times we're like, who's this white person? What are they doing? How are they holding themselves? You know, and so that there's trust that needs to be built up, and that trust is built up by continuing to show up and be in good relationship, not taking over, being, you know, not feeling like you're above making sandwiches, not feeling like, you know, you have to, basically, we want to see if your white savior mentality is going to come up. So can you be in relationship with us without trying to save, without trying to run everything, without trying to tell us what to do? And once you show up enough times and we see that, you know, you're not trying to be the savior, then we're like, okay, let's see what being in a relationship with you, because you begin to show that, you know, there's accountability here. You begin to show that we can develop a relationship based off mutuality.
And then what, in terms of, yes, thank you. Yes. And community doesn't work the same way organizations and institutions do. So can, you know, you all speak to that as well? Because I do, one of the things that I've learned, and James Baldwin has talked about this, and writers, especially, you know, Black writers, in terms of white people and how white people in general aren't connected to themselves and have more trouble being in community. I mean, we only have to look at people not wanting to get, you know, vaccinated or wear masks or what have you. So what are some of the ways that community operates differently or is connected differently than institutions? If you would speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think that after showing up and building those relationships, we'll begin to feel like, okay, maybe we could trust this person, maybe we can be in a relationship, right? And through that, you know, someone who's white, if someone has access to power and privilege, you know, and building a relationship of mutuality, they probably have access to resources that we don't have. And so at the same time, we have to make sure that, you know, when trying to be in relationship with an institution, that the institution doesn't expect the grassroots to act like the institution, because there's a lot of assumed norms. There's a lot of beliefs and implicit bias that people will believe that, oh, you know, you're gonna have, like, let's say, town hall. There's maybe some beliefs about how a town hall should be held, like things should start on time. These are all Western European social constructs, and so and then you impose that on a group. So it's really important to believe, to whatever you think is universal, it doesn't exist, because universalization is colonization. So when you call an organization to do something in this universal way, that's what you're telling them that they have to assimilate in order to be in relationship with you. So we have to make sure that if you're trying to be in relationship with some like different cultures, the thing about diversity and inclusion, it doesn't mean just adding Black faces to the same white processes and the same white practices. Diversity and inclusion, what it should mean, but honestly, that's kind of what it means at this point. But what it should mean is that you don't cause me to assimilate so that we can be in a relationship with you. It means that your institution has to learn how to break your bureaucracy to be in a relationship with someone with a different culture, with grassroots.
And I just say, when I do, I was just gonna, you know, finger snap the universalization is colonization, and the goal is not inclusion, right? It's liberation, because Black and brown people are included in problematic systems. So the goal is liberation, not diversity or inclusion. That's not the goal. It's what makes white people feel better when they have, you know, Black and brown faces in their spaces, and they think that's it. We're done. We get cookies. And that's simply not true. So I wanted to just lift that up and thank you and offer appreciation. I love that universalization.
Commodifying and commercialization of diversity, equity, inclusion, and how quickly that has become a thing is really telling in our time, and just how quickly the equity, the E part of that, like people can go for diversity and they can go for inclusion. But the second you start bringing them down to the bottom line of equity, that's really when the shit hits the fan. Like, you know, people just kind of start to lose their mind about, wait a second, what are you saying? We're gonna have to shift some resources? Hold on. I thought we could just like be more welcoming and people are gonna be, you know, happy to be here. So I don't also want to totally focus on the aspect of white folks coming into this work, because we do have Black and brown and Indigenous POC UUs who want to engage with liberation work out in the community. So is the entry different for folks that are Black and brown? Do the way we come into those spaces, do you see that vary in your work? Like what does that feel like and sound like and look like when it's moving really well?
Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. So a lot of times we have folks who are Black, Indigenous, POC, UUs who also are wanting to engage in what we would say faith-based liberatory work in the community. And the way that they may enter those spaces can be different than the way our white counterparts enter those spaces. And so I'm wondering, because they, you know, we kind of come as this Unitarian Universalist package sometimes of a mixed group, if that really is something that that we have to think about differently. Like, do we need to invite people in different ways into the work?
That's a tough question. Mimi, do you want to take that on? I think you're muted.
Okay, so like I'm confused, a little confused about the question too. So how do we invite like BIPOC VUUs in? Like what would we recommend from them, right?
Yeah.
Some of our ministries are Black only at BLM, so like it's important to also mention that like there are places where, you know, they're only for us because we feel like that is necessary. But I would say, like, you know, if you want to join like BLM and do movement work, like your heart has to be in this, you know, and like you have to have a passion to see Black people specifically liberated. You know, it's bigger than like using words like doing anti-racist work. You know, like sometimes we are Black Lives Matter for a reason, so you have to be willing to fight against anti-Black violence, and that has to be something that's that you feel in the core of your soul needs to be changed, and you're willing to do what it means to put into it. And like, you know, it's not a moment, right? These are movements. So be willing to stick it out for the long haul. And this movement is only going to be good as the people who come into it, the heart they come into it with, and the work ethic they come into it with. So all of that is really, really important. And like a lot of the times that people, they place really high expectations, you know, on specific organizations, and then they come in and they realize that we're just human, right? We're not fucking superheroes. So we have to like we have to have those difficult conversations where it's like, you know, if you want this to be some big beautiful thing, let's see what is your passion, what is your skill, what you know, we have 5 ministries now. So like, which one of these, is it art, is it healing, is it activism? You know, is it policy? Is it education that you want to do for community? Where do you see the places that you feel like you can really grow your liberation work in this movement, and then start to do that, you know, and start to do it in the best way that you can. So I think just having that passion and that power and that willingness to stick it out and actually see things through is really important. And just being able to work with a collective of folks, right? And a lot of it is about releasing individualism and leaning into like a collective and being a part of a group of other people instead of something bigger. So that's also seems to be a challenge that comes up too, when people want to just, well, I want to be this main one superstar, this charismatic leader, right? It's just like our movements can't be that way. We need you to, our organization is ran non-hierarchically for the most part. So we have 4 co-directors here. So we definitely try to, we're not an executive director, you know, so it's unlearning too. It's an unlearning process, being able to do movement work. And it is a very spiritual work as well. So your heart definitely has to be there in it for you to sustain this kind of work.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mimi. I think I would also add to that is also thinking about that, you know, in your spaces, right? Considering that the UU is the institution that it is, that does have a predominantly white base, of thinking about that when with the Black and brown folks that are in your spaces, you know, to making sure that you're cultivating and creating safe Black only, brown only spaces for those people, because it's ingrained in us as Black and brown people to assimilate. That is what we have been taught, is to assimilate. And so it's an unconscious thing that we do. If we're in a predominantly white space, then we naturally and unconsciously sometimes will assimilate to what that space is demanding of us. And so being able to have those spaces where we can be our authentic Black or brown body and selves, then we can, that is also contributing to our liberation and contributing to us naturalizing and fulfilling our full potential as Black people, or brown people, if you know, if you're brown. And so just making space for that in your institutions, so that when Black and brown people want to build relationships with other grassroots Black organizations, they also understand how to do so from their authentic self and not from what the institution is expecting of them.
Because I think we do a really good job of, we try and do a really good job of that in Unitarian Universalism, of the thought of that assimilation, just trying to homogenize everybody into the same, when really what we're trying to do is shift to a different way of being, right? And that homogenized version is not the goal at all. And so I see more recently, within Unitarian Universalism, the desire to be able to grow and caucus and spiritually grow as Black folks, as brown folks, as Indigenous folks in our own spaces, so that we can do that with authenticity, right, and integrity, and not do it in a way that is actually just self-perpetuating something that is already there, that we're actually trying to tear down.
Oftentimes because of that level of assimilation, right, we as Black people will perpetuate white violence through our proximity to whiteness, right? If I'm a Black woman with a white partner and I'm bringing my white partner into Black only Indigenous spaces, I am now giving my white partner permission to be in spaces where they would otherwise not have access. And oftentimes those white people may come with an enhanced level of white saviorism and or white violence in the name of, oh, I'm not racist, look at my Black partner, right? And so when we're not given opportunities to be our authentic Black selves in all Black spaces, we will often perpetuate the violence that has been perpetuated in the world on ourselves and our own personal lives unknowingly. And so I'll jump off my soapbox now.
And particularly, it's important for us in UU spaces, because this has been a recurring theme of trying to get everybody to understand about why Black spaces are sacred within Unitarian Universalism, and why it is necessary, and that we're not going to apologize for it anymore. Like this is no longer up for debate. It is, I often refer to it as the lifeboat. We will leave you the lifeboat of information and you can peruse it as you want, but we are moving on to doing what we need to do in order for people to get free. And I know within the Latino community, within Unitarian Universalism, that created a huge schism, about a decade ago of really diverse ideas about what welcoming really is and inclusion is, because we had a lot of Latino folks who wanted to bring in white partners into Black and brown spaces, and people were just saying no, and it was difficult and necessary. It was a difficult and necessary conversation, and I think that one that we have to continue to have amongst ourselves to make sure that we're doing it with integrity, but that isn't up for debate, from our white peers.
In topic and conversation, I think it's a hot topic because we see it so often in the movement spaces, specifically where Black and or brown people have white partners, and it's not to say that you shouldn't have a white partner, right? That is your choice and your prerogative. That's what you choose. But it is now your responsibility to be responsible for that white partner and making sure that you're not making your Black or brown friends or comrades or whatever uncomfortable by bringing that person around without consent, right? That person doesn't automatically get access to every space you have access to just because they're your partner, and you need to be respectful and responsible of that, and making sure that you're getting the consent of the people that you're around to bring that person around. And because we may not, just because they're your partner, and we may actually like them as your partner, but it doesn't mean we want them in our space all the time. And so making sure that you're responsible for that.
Man, 100%. Yeah.
I wanted to also ask about the idea of coerced consent. One of the things that, especially in Unitarian Universalist spaces, folks love to write, I wish they loved to write more checks, but there is this idea of, I'm going to write a check to support a cause, but with that check comes strings. And that's true for all 501c3s, right? It's a way the government controls really activism and any kind of social services. So would you three talk more about what you experience as coerced consent in terms of whether it's financial or otherwise? What are some of the things that you've seen and best practices to avoid that when possible?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a huge issue because I think it can happen without people realizing it. So when you have access to resources, you have access to power and privilege. And when you're working with communities who don't have access to those resources, you now have power and privilege over those communities. And so that is a power dynamic that you have to be aware of. And then you have to realize that now that we're in this position of I have power over you because I am giving you resources that you now depend on, or you now, rely on. How are we dealing with this power dynamic? And so one of the ways that I think, people can think, well, I would never tell you, in order for you to have this money, you have to do this, right? That's obviously coerced consent, right? But I'm not even talking about that, because you can just give someone a check bigger than they had before and then ask them for a favor, and they're going to feel obligated for that favor. And so, for example, we do some solidarity work in the Navajo Nation, and we've made some rules because we are bringing food, things that people rely on. We don't take pictures. We don't even ask, because they're going to feel like they have to say yes because we just gave them food. And so there's nothing, there's no way of, once you have that power dynamic, you have to move differently. You have to be careful of what you ask of that group, because they're going to feel in debt to you. And so how do you deal with that? And so obviously making sure that the resources don't have expectations is one important way, but also just be careful what you ask, or ask before you bring the resources in, right? Because they could be saying yes out of a place of obligation, feeling like they have to do that.
Yeah, I just want to affirm that as a white UU, I have to be really, really, really careful about those power dynamics, right? Fundraising is a major part of our partnership and what we do with UU Jazz. I think moving money from people who have a lot of privilege and resources into grassroots activism is a big part of what we do. And it's not, obviously no one's gonna be like, I'm giving you this money and you have to do X, Y, Z. But like Zarra said, I have to be really careful. Like, I even thought really hard, like, if I ask them to come on The VUU, are they gonna think they have to say yes because of, what our partnership is, right? And like, would I ask them is this something they would want to do anyway because it's part of their ministry and activism? Are they doing this as a favor to me? Is that appropriate to ask? So like, I would just affirm what Zarra said, but encourage what you use to like really, really think about those power dynamics, because any favor that you ask is going to have that weight behind it of any money that you've raised, any benefits that you've conferred as part of your partnership. And if you actually want to be in relationship, in partnership, you can't have that. You can't be exploiting your resources and your power in order to have power over someone that's not showing up as a partner.
That a lot, Janine, in our UU spaces in terms of grant making and resource allocation, right? So much of that is quote unquote outcome driven. So we will give you X resources and you will tell us the outcome of those resources after we've given them to you. And we expect you to not only predict what that outcome will be, but then report back on it if you should want more resource, right? So that kind of trifecta right there of expectation around, just recently getting people away from the idea that they're going to be able to take a picture with every poor kid that they help. But even the expectation that they're going to get a report back on what these resources are doing. And that is not partnership, right? That is a coerced consent. Because even if you say, yes, I'll give you the report because I need the money, that still is a coercion of that consent. It's not, if everything else was being equal, I would be taking that time of preparing that report, right? And actually using it for us to get free. So, that is a coercion of that time. And so super important for us to reflect back to people, when we're moving these resources, particularly that expectation needs to go away. It really does. It just needs to go away.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point, and it actually speaks to our most recent experience with the UUs. When going, we went up to Minnesota back in, I think, the end of July. I don't know, time moves so fast, but I think the end of July. And the UUs were offering a pretty big chunk of like resources and money to make this trip happen. And, in that process, there was this expectation that now, because they're providing the resources, well, they should be able to document it and have someone on the ground up in Minnesota in the indigenous spaces, documenting and like on video documenting and taking pictures of the process because, we funded it, so we should be able to send our person to capture it on video. And luckily, we as BLM did not have to deal with that conversation, but I know it was put Janine in a really uncomfortable position to have to say multiple times that, hey, we're not comfortable with this, and finally saying BLM said no, this is not something that can happen, and they finally backed off. But it was a very high pressured situation of really trying to push their way into allowing their videography crew on the ground to document what happened. And so that's one really good example of resource an expectation of exchange because of the resources that were provided. And so
this is fucked up. That is not being an accountable relationship, right? The invitation is, we have this resource of a videography team. Is there a way that could be useful to you all in this work that you're doing, right? If it is, great. If it's not, awesome. We're moving on. But to have to to twist it around to be, no, this is part of what has to happen because we're providing this other resource, and full stop it to the point of, just really having to say, no, that is not partnership. That's not collaborative. That's not, Jesus Christ, how hard is it to talk about what it means to be in covenantal faith with one another and to spiritually respect each other's needs.
One great example of collaboration partnership is just like over the summer, BLM went up with UUs twice to Line 3 and the resistance fight up there. Initially, our first experience was great. And they funded everything, and there wasn't anything like requested of us. The second time we went up, it was different. I think Janine can speak to the particularities of the differences here, but we definitely on the back end felt the difference because we're like, okay, now there's these things being asked of us. Now, in order for us to get funding, we have to move the date of our trip, which moved us up, which meant that we were not as prepared, which ended up causing harm. We ended up we ended up collaborating with a group that we didn't know, moving way too fast, not at the speed of relationships, but at the speed of money, because they were like, well, if you want this money, you have to go during this week. And we're like, well, there's no other way we can go without it. So I guess we'll do that. And then, it ended up causing harm. But the first time, there weren't those expectations put on there, and it was a much better trip. So I think that can just speak to just similar people in the same place, and there's huge different results. And I think a large part it came from the expectations that were put there.
Educating ourselves and not expecting our organizers to educate us. Like that is part of our responsibility when we're going into spaces as Unitarian Universalists. Janine?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to be really clear, speaking to other UUs, that, so as a white UU myself, I've been taught that there's only one way that institutions can work, right? Of course you have to have a grant report at the end. Of course things have to be approved by the board. They have to be top down, right? And it really doesn't have to be that way. So what the alternative looks like is the first trip that Zarra is talking about. We literally did a ton of paperwork and fundraising on our back end and just showed up with an envelope of cash and was like, here you go. Let me know if you need anything. Have a great trip. And I know that some people think oh, you can never do things that way. But yes, you can. You can do that. I think when Mimi and I started working, I think this is a good example. When Mimi and I started working together on the Defund Coalition, there were lots of different orgs, right? And we all had different resources. And we had a conversation one day about power and how some of us sitting in the space were literally there with a full-time paid job to be there. And some of us were totally showing up as volunteers, and what kind of power and equity that was creating in this space. And so we did some fundraising and pulled some resources together and created a fellowship from UU Jazz for Mimi. And I think at first, you can speak to this, Mimi, but I think at first you were like, I don't know about this money. What strings does this have? And I'm literally, I'm just going to send you a check every month for the next 6 months. We did no final report. We never even had a meet. I don't think we ever had a meeting, right? You don't have to do things that way. You really don't. And so I think it's part of what we always talk about with white folks unlearning white supremacy culture. You can imagine a different way. You've got to lean into that imagining. What kind of world are we trying to create? What does shared liberation look like? And then just start acting like it's already real. Just do things that way.
what their greatest fear is when we start talking about accountability around resources and the distribution of wealth and you know, during the height of COVID last year lockdown, we were doing similar, going out into the community with envelopes of money and handing it out to people, and the donor's fear was always that somebody would get too much, somebody would get twice, or some, you know, and we were like, yeah, like if that's the worst thing that could happen, that somebody would have extra money to get extra food, like how bad is, like, the idea that somehow it's just not controlled or not exact, just seems to be so terrifying sometimes, that it's hard to get past, and to get to that other side of just the relief and being able to, you know, just like you're saying, that first trip, being able to do what you got to do when you got to do it, how you know is the best way to do it and the healthiest way to do it. That's where we want to get.
I'm aware of my white voice, and I don't want to take up too much space, but what I'm seeing here feels like a really familiar pattern, in that every privileged group fears losing power because I think they fear that they will be treated as they have been treating others. Like white male homophobia is about fearing that they will be targeted by other white men the way they treat women. And racism is about fearing that people of color will treat white people, like if the roles were reversed, that they would be cruel and horrible and treat white people the way that white people have been treating people of color for so long. And I think it's telling that we assume that others are only capable of what we are capable of, as opposed to trusting that maybe people aren't as much assholes as we are.
All one thing, right? That
Right,
nobody, yeah. Like, if I the trust of a covenantal relationship, that I'm going to trust that you are going to be, even if it is about me, you are going to be the best me that I can possibly be, as opposed to the most base me that I can possibly be, would be even just a great place to start from. And Keisha writes, yeah, people of color don't want revenge. We want to be allowed to exist and thrive while receiving our reparations. Amen. Right. Oh my God. We need that, like, on a t-shirt and a bumper sticker, and, well, no bumper sticker. We yes, absolutely. 100%.
White people don't trust other people because we know ourselves to be untrustworthy. And we are incapable of imagining anybody operating in a way different than our own.
Keisha, I would love for you to say out loud what you typed in there, because it is pretty powerful. Chris named part of it, and then if you would, and Zarra, Keisha, Zarra, and Mimi.
Yeah, so I think to Dawn's point, you know, I think that oftentimes, or that when resources are given to Black folks or people of color, there's this automatic assumption by the white entity or person giving that resource that the Negro or the savage, right, doesn't won't know what to do with those resources unless they're given guidance by the white person giving that resource. There's this assumption that we need hand holding and that we're children who have no idea how to produce anything worthwhile without the assistance of a white person and or entity. And so with that being said, it's like that's where that fear comes from, of the need to have a grant report, or the need to have Janine mentioned that Mimi and Janine didn't even have any sort of like touch base throughout that 6 months, right? But typically there's that need to, I need to check in and see what they're doing with my money. I need to check in and see what progress they've made. Is this worth my time and my resource? Without the full trust, and there's often not the full trust of that person who is receiving the resource that they'll do good with it. And, and let's just say, maybe they do have used that money to buy food instead of produce what was required of them for that resource. God forbid they took care of their family, like someone else said. I'm not sure who said it, right? And so it's always that need for control. And the thing is, like, Black people don't want revenge. If we wanted revenge, things would look a lot differently, right? We're not trying to shift the power dynamic so that we can now make you our slaves. That's not what we're trying to do here. We don't want anything to do with you. Let's be real. We just want to exist and thrive and be able to create a Black Wall Street and have a Black pride and have Black only spaces without the fear of police coming in and or other entities coming in and tearing it down because we gained too much power. We just want to exist. Give us our reparations and let us exist in peace. That's all we want. Leave us alone. And give us your resources. That's all we want.
Yeah.
And I know Chris was kind of talking about this earlier, but, it kind of is just about equity, like how do we show up in a way that is not equal but equitable? So like if we need additional and more resources than the average organizer, because we're because of our history and how we are our communities that have been historically ravaged through by white supremacy. So it's just like, going back to Janine's example, like if you're showing up in coalition spaces, right? Like if like you work for a $2 million, like a $500,000 organization, and you have paid staff, and then these other organizers are coming up and they're Black or they're brown and they have volunteers, like how can you show up for them better? And and it's not, and sometimes like it's harder for us to voice our opinions and to say like this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what we deserve. And that's because that's histories of historical trauma saying that we're not good enough and we're not deserving enough. So sometimes what you just need to do is just check on your comrade and see how they're doing. If you're in coalition with them, like, hey, what do you need? Like how has this space been treating you? Are there any kind of additional resources that you feel like you could be providing? Like how are you holding the weight of what you just did? Like those kinds of things, because it is difficult for us to even engage sometimes, and that's how we build stronger communities. We build stronger relationships. So I think just being that first person to check on your Black, brown, and indigenous comrades at any point you can, to see where they're headed about certain things, and again, and how they're doing, because it is difficult. And what happens if this stuff doesn't get addressed? It just ends up causing harm. Then it looks like we dropped out. We didn't drop out of nothing. What happened was it wasn't an equitable space. There were, enormous amounts of anti-Black violence that were happening, and we were never heard. So then we disappeared. So it's just like, if you feel that happening and you can feel like people visibly starting to fade, then please check on your people.
On your people, and this is a time, as we're coming up to the top of the hour, I would remind our Unitarian Universalist congregations that we've been now almost a year and a half pretty much without using some of our biggest capital resources, our buildings, our physical plants. And I really encourage us to make a determination whether or not that is what is sustaining our churches and our congregations, or is that resource that we can give up and redistribute. Because it is clear that we can maintain our community without necessarily maintaining those structures. And so where are those resources? Where do they need to be? Who built them? Let's ask that, right? Like, who built those endowments? Who built those UU churches? Number one, and how do we get those resources back to those folks? Because I can guarantee you it was not the white dudes out there building up those churches. So, check on your comrades and check on the privilege that we have in our congregations, in our endowments, in our rainy day funds, and how we need to be redistributing that wealth. Because if we can start even shifting some of those baseline resources, we have a tremendous opportunity, and there's no reason that we can't do it. We've proven over and over again that we can.
A good point, talking about the churches and being in relationship with grassroots organizations. Oftentimes the first touch point of relationship building is to invite grassroots into the church. Come to our church. We're different, right? Well, come to our church. You can see we strive on diversity and inclusion, right? And that there's a lot of trauma in church for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. You know, if you think back to boarding schools, if you think back to like the white Christian heteronormative patriarchal structure that has been adopted by white Christians, but also runs rampant in the Black Christian communities even, you know? And so for queer people, right, that churches can be triggering. And so inviting someone to, if you're trying to build relationship with this Black or brown org or even queer org, and you're saying, come to my church, come check us out, we're different. You just sound like every other person who's knocked on my door with a pamphlet that I'm now suspicious of, and I'm absolutely not going to come to your church or want to build relationship with you. And so being mindful too of how using that as your first point of connection is not going to get you the result you want oftentimes.
I might have even been not the best UU about that, because I don't think I even told you all what Unitarian Universalism was until we knew each other for a while, and y'all were like, we thought you were like a Scientology cult. Like, we didn't even know what you were. But I think for me, like, I could talk all I wanted about what our values are and what UUs believe and what we do. But it isn't going to matter what I say until I show that through my actions, right? I mean, like, it just isn't going to matter. So I don't even really lead with that. You know, I'm a UU. This is our values. It doesn't matter. Like, you just have to show up and live your values, and then let people make their own determinations about what kind of person you are, what Unitarian Universalism means, because they can see it, instead of just hanging out your BLM flag on your church and expecting them to roll through your door.
Well, we are at the top of our hour. Was there anything that we missed that you wanted to make sure that we let people know? We will be dropping all of your orgs and hashtags and all of that good stuff into the comments and chats, so people know how to reach out and make connection. But I just wanted to say I really appreciate y'all taking the time to be here and to continue to grow this, and I'd love to continue the conversation.
Thank you for
All
having
right.
us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for
All right.
sharing this.
Folks, we will see you next week on The View, and we look forward to seeing you then, and take care of each other until then.
Thank you for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/give for more information. We hope you will join us next week for another episode of The View.